Released out of nowhere just last week, the first 3 numbered Doom games are now available across current generation consoles. And on the surface, this is great news. But it wasn't long before the complaints started rolling in. 2 of these ports have serious issues. To find out for sure though, we're taking a closer look at all 3 games across each platform. What's going on with the first 2 Doom games, and how does this version of Doom 3 compare to previous releases? Let's find out, starting with Doom 1 and 2. Even today, the original Doom remains one of the finest games ever made. With a perfect blend of brilliant map design, finely tuned gameplay, and a gorgeous presentation, it's a game I've continued to return to for decades, and I know I'm not alone on that. And thankfully, Doom 1 and 2 are both available on just about any device you can imagine. Since its original release in late 1993, Doom has been ported to just about everything with the CPU, and that includes game consoles. Doom is one of the rare games that has appeared on at least one console from each and every generation since its initial release. I spent nearly 1 hour examining each of these official ports in episode 34 of DF Retro, but now it's time for one more conversion. Developed by Nerve Software, these new conversions of Doom and Doom 2 continue the console tradition. On the surface, that's good news, but if you dig deeper, there are a multitude of technical issues that spoil the fun. Keep in mind that Nerve Software has a long history with id games, and in fact was founded by an ex-id Software employee. Nerve was responsible for the original Xbox Live Arcade release of Doom, among others. Unfortunately, this new version seems like a step down. The first complaint centers around the DRM included in these downloads, forcing players to log into a Bethesda account to play the game. Even worse, if you rely on the sleep function on your console, this message will continue to pop up over and over again every 10 seconds. And the only solution is to close and restart the game. It's a terrible decision, and as a result, this has dominated the conversation. Bethesda has even suggested that it will fix this problem. But unfortunately, this is just scratching the surface, and the real problems go deeper. In bringing Doom back to modern platforms then, Nerve Software has seemingly ported the codebase to C# while using Unity as a shell of sorts. This approach could prove useful for porting the game to other platforms, of course, but it all seems rather unnecessary. Unlike most games today, however, there really is no noticeable difference between the different console versions. Doom appears to use software rendering on all 3 machines, while outputting at 1080p with poor scaling and borders. Which is our first visual problem. The rendering resolution selected here, which is higher than the default 320x200 of the PC original, does not scale evenly to the 1080p output resolution, and since the image is not interpolated in any way, the result is uneven pixels. Look closely at this slope here. There's a noticeable variation in pixel height. Certain pixels are 1 pixel high while others appear to be 2. It's a problem which produces results similar to Castlevania Symphony of the Night on Sega Saturn with its pre-scaled artwork. It just looks messy in action. In addition, the aspect ratio is incorrect. This is a common problem with some conversions of Doom, and it persists here. This gives the impression that monsters are shorter and wider than they should be, while Doom Guy's portrait appears rather squished. This new version of Doom also retains its 35 frames per second cap, a frame rate which does not divide evenly into 60 Hz. In its original form, Doom was designed to run on CRT monitors at 70 Hz. 35 frames per second is exactly half the refresh rate, thus the motion appears consistent. Consoles, however, do not support 70 Hz output, and most will be played at 60 Hz, which means uneven frame persistence leading to visible judder. Considering how many source ports eliminate this cap, I feel it was a mistake to retain 35 frames per second gameplay. As with Nerve's previous Doom ports, however, it also appears that the lighting is incorrect and overly bright in certain scenarios. Basically, when it comes to the visual presentation, the game looks okay at first glance, but as you play, these issues become more evident, which is disappointing. But it's the audio that perhaps falls furthest. There are two problems here: music playback and sound effect pitch shifting. Firstly, the sound seems to have been recorded using the stock Windows GS MIDI and then played back as pre-recorded files. Perhaps as a result of sample rate adjustment or some other issue, the actual playback of the music is too slow. Here's how E1M1 should sound normally. And this is how it sounds in the nerve port. Notice the difference? Slowing down the music doesn't necessarily ruin the tunes, mind you, but it is less accurate, which is the problem here. Sound effects wise, everything seems somewhat muffled and it lacks the pitch shifted audio of the earlier versions of Doom, so we end up with a lack of clarity and variability. Taken together, this version just doesn't look or sound great. It's even lacking the online multiplayer of the previous XBLA version, and there's issues with re-downloading those versions from the Xbox store if you already own them. So yeah, this new release of Doom simply isn't very good. It's playable and still Doom, but these problems shouldn't exist in a new official conversion. Thankfully, our next subject has a much happier ending.
And I'd like to show you something using the GeForce 3 and OpenGL running on Mac OS X. And it's not a normal something. It's something by one of the legends in 3D computer graphics and gaming, John Carmack.
This is Doom 3. Released 11 years after the original, Doom 3 is a divisive but technically stunning showpiece which helped usher in a new generation of 3D rendering, and now it's available on current generation consoles. Doom 3 is a complete re-envisioning of the Doom concept. It's scarier, darker, yet more methodical than the original. It's a very different experience. First demonstrated at Macworld 2001, Doom 3 promised a unified lighting model in which lighting behaved in a realistic fashion unlike any other game before it. The following year, it unveiled a dramatic demo at E3 2002. This real-time demonstration blew away expectations with a level of fidelity quite unlike anything available on any platform. Real-time lighting, shadows, detailed texture work, and a world dripping in atmosphere. It was truly something to look forward to. But development took some time and the game was not released until mid-2004, and it's here where I finally got my hands on the finished version of the game on day one. Some folks dislike the slower gameplay and design changes, and I understand that, but personally I feel it stands the test of time as a unique combat experience. It's not a replacement for the original Doom, mind you, but it's a wonderful game in its own right. It was also a technical powerhouse, pushing my Radeon 9700 Pro equipped Pentium 4 to the absolute limit. Despite this, the game launched with comparatively fewer issues compared to other major first-person shooters that year. Games like Half-Life 2 would launch in a very poor technical state with lots of performance issues across a wide range of PCs. Doom 3 was demanding, but it was very well optimized and free of any significant bugs. And like Doom before it, Doom 3 would make an appearance on each following console generation, starting with the original Xbox. Programmed by Vicarious Visions, the Xbox port of Doom 3 is an impressive conversion with a slew of level design changes and new features such as cooperative play. It's a fascinating port, but that's perhaps beyond the scope of this video. As much as I'd love to discuss every version of Doom 3 in depth, that will have to wait for the inevitable episode of DF Retro. Be sure to let me know if that's something you'd like to see. For now though, we're focusing in on the latest conversion of Doom 3, the PS4, Xbox One, and Switch versions of Doom 3 BFG. The BFG edition of Doom 3 was released late last generation on Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and the PC. It made many changes to the core gameplay, including modifying ammo counts and replacing the flashlight with a shoulder-mounted torch, while modifying elements of the visuals themselves. While I prefer the look and balance of the original game, the BFG edition is still an excellent way to enjoy Doom 3 today. Panic Button has taken point on this project and delivered a great conversion across all three consoles, and each version takes full advantage of its respective machine as a result. The Switch version turns in a native 1080p presentation at 60 frames per second when docked and 720p while undocked. If you're playing the game on Xbox One X or PS4 Pro, Doom 3 delivers a full native 4K experience. And for Pro owners using a 1080p display, the game automatically downsamples as well. No need to rely on the OS level option here. The base consoles then, of course, run at 1080p just like Switch. All versions aim to deliver a smooth 60 frames per second experience at the highest possible resolution each platform is capable of. Yes, Doom 3 is an older game, but you can't take this for granted. It's an impressive achievement. We've seen plenty of last generation games ported to newer consoles struggle to run properly after all. This new release then offers a couple new options compared to the PS3 and Xbox 360 conversions, such as full FOV adjustment and support for flashlight shadows. That last setting, I should note, impacts all dynamic lights, not just the flashlight beam, just like on PC. Enabling it here is the equivalent of using ultra quality lighting in that PC version. Visually, aside from resolution, the game is identical across all machines as you would expect. Now, the visuals are starting to show their age, true, but the use of light and shadow remain impressive even now, and animation work is simply stellar. It was a huge step above other PC games at this time, and it still holds up today. Performance is, of course, a critical point of discussion, and if you're on Xbox One X or PlayStation 4 Pro, you can rest easy. This is a rock-solid 60 frames per second experience. After spending a few hours with each version, I was unable to produce any slowdown or drop in performance at all. There is always a chance that things could drop later in the game, of course, but I suspect that won't be the case. Doom 3 is a true native 4K 60 experience on both machines, something we do not often see this generation, especially on PS4 Pro. The base machines, of course, perform similarly well, but it's the Switch version that fascinates the most. Like the other versions, 60 frames per second is the target, but unfortunately this target is not always met. It's close, but larger areas tend to introduce performance issues that see a drop from the target frame rate, which is disappointing. In addition, enabling flashlight shadows and maxing out the FOV has a significant impact on performance, as you can see here. Reducing the FOV and disabling shadows increases performance by roughly 15%. What's more interesting about this port, however, is that this isn't the first time this specific type of hardware has run Doom 3. Even looking beyond the typical homebrew versions of Doom 3, the BFG version was released officially for NVIDIA's Shield Android TV, a device which shares the same Tegra X1 core as the Switch. The difference? This device is powered by Android, which is not known for its graphics performance. Before I could even test this, however, I had to jump through hoops. While we had previously purchased Doom 3 on the Shield, it's now delisted and no longer available to download, even if you own the game. The digital future, ladies and gentlemen. Thankfully, Android is an open platform and it was easy enough to sideload an APK with the game and data necessary to play. We shouldn't have to do this, however, after spending the money. With it up and running on the Shield then, how does it stack up against Switch? Well, the Shield version also runs at a full 1080p, just like Switch. It lacks the option to enable flashlight shadows, doesn't utilize anti-aliasing, and features washed out colors in comparison for some reason. The big difference stems from performance. Unlike Switch, the Shield version seems to drop frames constantly. It's rarely severe, mind you, but the frame rate just never feels consistent, and the frame time graph is regularly disturbed. What's strange here is that it seems to be running worse in the latest version of the OS versus what we used for testing back in the day. so performance has seemingly degraded significantly. Keep in mind this is the exact same device used in the previous video, which shows more consistent performance using an older OS. How curious. That said, in reality, the Switch version really isn't dramatically better. It doesn't exhibit those constant small dips I observed on Android, but it does drop pretty hard in certain situations. Of course, to be completely fair, most of the benchmarking here on Switch was done with the FOV maxed out and flashlight shadows enabled, both of which demand more from the hardware. Thus, if you consider the extra 15% boost in performance you get from using default settings like the Shield version, the Switch does come out on top. Unsurprisingly, the Switch manages to run better when in portable mode. The reduction in resolution from 1080p of docked to 720p helps make up for those demanding settings, and I found the experience to be quite nice on the go. It isn't perfect, but it's closer. In fact, playing Doom 3 on a portable system at 60 frames per second does feel kind of crazy to me. It's a game that will always feel high-end in my mind, despite having released ages ago. To think there was a time when this game could push PC graphics cards to the absolute limit, and here we have it running on a Nintendo portable system. But if you step back and look at all versions of the game, clearly the Switch version is the worst of the bunch. Xbox One X and PS4 Pro then are my picks for this game. At least all versions run smoother than the PS360 original versions of Doom 3 BFG, as you'd expect, but the single biggest improvement over those versions is the decrease in loading times. These were very slow on last generation machines, but all current consoles have little trouble loading up each new map. This makes playing the game on higher difficulties more enjoyable, as dying does not mean waiting. Oh, and I should also mention that unlike Doom 1 and 2's current release, Doom 3 does not require you to sign into a Bethesda account. It will prompt you the first time, but you can simply back out and start playing the game. It's completely optional, no internet is required here. If there's one takeaway from this session for me though, it's that I still love Doom 3. It has this unique atmosphere and feel that just works. The gameplay is slower than classic Doom, of course, but it still manages to feel more action-packed than many other shooters that would follow in its wake. It's a game focused on movement while dealing with enemies in close quarters. In 2004, long-distance shooters were becoming increasingly popular, and the rise of Call of Duty would shift the focus from up-close and personal to distant targets along the horizon. Doom 3 may not match the originals, but it still focuses on key elements which define them. It's also a ridiculously lengthy game, and the BFG version includes the original expansion pack, Resurrection of Evil, and an extra set of levels on top of that, so there is a ton of content here. Having tested each version then, I feel driven to return to Doom 3 again at some point in the future for a proper episode of DF Retro. The Xbox port is just so fascinating, and there are a multitude of mods available on PC which allow you to crank up the visual quality to the next level. I mean, just check out these parallax occlusion maps, just beautiful. But let's quickly summarize all the data we've uncovered throughout this video. The ports of Doom and Doom 2, they're not good enough in their current state. The scaling issues, incorrect lighting, bad sound, and frame rate cap all result in a very mediocre version of Doom. Yes, it's still Doom, and it's still fun to play, there's no doubt about that, but it could and should be so much better. Doom 3, on the other hand, is stellar across every platform. Only on Switch will you encounter any rough edges from time to time, and even then it's still rather good. Panic Button has done a tremendous job with this conversion. But that's it for the moment. If you enjoyed this video, as always, be sure to let us know by liking, subscribing, ringing the notification bell at the top to get instant updates from Digital Foundry, and of course, come find us over on Twitter, especially if you want to talk about Doom. And until next time, this is John signing off.